Welcome to this podcast is making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This episode 88. Today's guest is a legendary casting director. He's the executive VP of casting at NBC Universal. He was the casting director for hundreds of TV shows and films spanning 5 decades. His credits include Alf, The Facts of Life, Married with Children, That 70s Show, and of course, he was the casting director on Seinfeld for the entire 9-year run of the series, responsible for casting all of your favorite Seinfeld cast and guest stars. Please welcome Marc Hirschfeld. Marc, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Marc, take us back. 1989, Seinfeld launches. Obviously, we talked about some of your credits doing Alf, 227, etc. But how did the role, how did the job opportunity come about? I mean, was it Castle Rock? Was it a relationship with Larry? Tell us a little bit of how the whole Seinfeld thing came about.
So I had started as a casting director at Norman Lear's company, which was Embassy Television. And the heads of Embassy, which was Alan Horn, who's now the president of Disney, and Glenn Padnick, who's the president of television at the time, and Marty Schaefer and Rob Reiner, all left Embassy and started their own company, Castle Rock. So I've been doing Married with Children and The Jeffersons and 227 and The Facts of Life and One Day at a Time and all these shows over there. And I was actually on staff at Embassy. And a woman who's another casting director named Meg Lieberman said, why don't we partner up and we'll leave Embassy? So we did. And Embassy said, well, we still want you to cast our shows. And then Glenn Padnick and Rob and everyone left the production company to start their own business. And so we started casting projects for them. And one of the producers that we were working with on a couple pilots was a guy named Gary Gilbert, who was casting a project. And of course, I can't remember the name of it at the moment. But we actually had Jerry Seinfeld in to meet on the project for the lead. And the meeting was with us and Gary and Rob Reiner and Glenn Padnick. And ultimately it did not, and Jerry's manager was there, George Shapiro and Howard West. And, you know, it was a great meeting and, but it didn't end up moving forward for him in that. But I think as a result of that, Jerry's managers started kicking around the idea of a series for Jerry. And Jerry and Larry came up with an idea for the show and brought it to Castle Rock and ended up getting a green light for a pilot, not through NBC Primetime, but through their late night department, because Primetime wasn't that excited about him. And the guy who was the head of late night at the time was a big fan of Jerry's and used some money out of his late night department to produce the pilot of the show. So since Jerry and Larry were not experienced showrunners, Castle Rock brought Gary Gilbert in to executive produce the show because he was experienced. Mm-hmm. So we were brought in through Castle Rock and our relationship with Gary to cast the series. Now, in the long run, you know, Gary and Larry did not see eye to eye. Larry and Jerry really wanted to sort of execute the show that they wanted to do. So I believe it was after the pilot, or maybe it was the first 4 episodes. I think it was the pilot. Gary Gilbert ended up exiting, and you know, Larry David ended up running the show with Jerry. But that's how it started.
Yep. And it's interesting. You touched on something there that they wanted to run the show. You know, they wanted to run. We've talked to so many guest stars and different people who have mentioned that, you know, their vision and they stuck to it. And, you know, that goes with even the casting. I mean, almost everyone we've talked to has mentioned how unusual the casting process was for them on Seinfeld compared to other shows. They all brought it up, every single one of them. Whenever we asked them, like, yeah, it was really strange. I got the job basically the same day. I auditioned, and then, you know, we were shooting. Like, it just seemed like it was different, and that's the vibe we get about Seinfeld, and that's how you make legendary shows by being different. Maybe you could touch on who's this? Was that a conscious decision, the way you guys auditioned and kind of hired people right on the spot, or was that like what was the decision behind that? Was it just the way you guys did it? I'm just curious.
Well, normally in the early days of the show, things are a little more last minute. We're shooting the show, we're table reading the show on a Wednesday, and then we rehearse Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, weekend off, and then shoot Monday. A lot of the exteriors were shot Monday, and then Tuesday in front of the studio audience. So that was the schedule. Now, and then they would start the next show on the next Wednesday. They would take a hiatus every 3-4 weeks, but it was pretty intense. And if the script was not ready on Wednesday, then we waited till Thursday or Friday. And we would work Friday, Saturday, and then Monday, Tuesday. So it was really about the scripts not being ready. And it was like that for the entire 9 seasons. I mean, the scripts were not a lot of, they were fine tuning them
right
to the very last moment. And so we would get a script literally, if we were lucky, then, 2 days before. And then we could start pre-reading actors, auditioning actors, and then bringing our selects to producers. But many times, we didn't get the script till a Friday night. We had to be calling agents and actors at home on Friday nights to set up auditions for Saturday morning. And then those actors would come in on Saturday morning, and they'd all be sitting outside the casting office. We'd have them in to read for Larry and Jerry. We'd say, okay, have a seat outside. And then I would come out and say, John O'Hurley, please stay. Everyone else, thank you very much. John, you have to go right to set. And it happened more than once. And it's funny because, I don't know if you know, there's a very well-known actor named Richard Schiff who was on The West Wing, and he's a terrific actor. And I can't tell you how many times he came in to read and he never booked. And he would say, I was on the golf course, I would get a call, I did to run in, and you never booked me, Hirschfeld. And, it was just that kind of a thing. Right. But people would come in at the last minute. It was really stressful. In fact, so it was myself and I had a casting associate, Brian Myers, working on the show with me. And we would be pre-reading actors. That's basically reading actors for the first time to see if they would make the cut. He'd be reading actors in one room. I'd be reading actors in another. Anyone I liked, I'd have sit down, wait in the lobby. If he saw someone he liked, he'd bring them to me. I'd like them, either send him home or put him in the lobby. And then we'd have, a half hour later, we'd have a casting session with Larry and Jerry. I mean, it was that stressful.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
So,
and it didn't get better over the 9 years. I mean, it was always sort of a last minute thing, but you kind of, you just felt like a fireman waiting for the alarm bell to go off and to respond to the fire. It was fun. It was exciting.
Well, Mark, I mean, we talk about it a lot on our show. I think the unique thing about Seinfeld is how unselfish the Big Four were. And
say again?
How unselfish the Big Four were, right?
Yeah.
The actual stars of the show, to let these guest stars really shine. And that's just a testament to you. I mean, how you found these people is incredible. So if we just go back, let's start with just season 1. We don't want to touch too much on it, but and Matt Goldman, one of the original writers, said that's where the show was just developing, and pretty much the 4 main characters. But the original Morty, can we touch on that? What did you like at the time, and what didn't you like that you meant to replace him?
Well, I think, once again, it was sort of a last minute thing. He was, it was John Randolph, right?
Mm-hmm. No, Randolph was Frank.
I'm sorry, Frank, sorry. It was just, the show had some growing pains. When it first started, it was, the whole conceit of the show was Jerry did stand up at the top of the show. Then the episode had to do something with that bit he did at the beginning of the show. And then at the end of the show, he kind of wrapped up with another piece of stand-up. But, during the maturation process of the show, we realized we didn't really need that stand-up to kind of set the plot of the show. and the show matured into something else. So it was the same thing with some of the actors. We really only replaced a handful of actors on the show during the 9 seasons, which is amazing. And sometimes you have an actor and they do a great job, but there's just something missing, and you go back to the drawing board after the fact and figure out, what, who else might be available.
Yeah.
Jerry Stiller is a perfect example of that. It was very rare that we flew an actor in from New York. You have to remember, back in the day, no internet. If you wanted to audition an actor on tape, they had to go into a studio. They taped it, usually on 3/4 inch. They had to FedEx the tape out. It took days. That's how. It's miraculous that Jason Alexander. That's how he got the job originally. Is we had him tape in New York and flew the tape out, and then it was really kind of unheard of. So we rarely flew in actors for the show. Not to mention budgetarily, it was this is originally a very a low budget show. It was a little show. NBC only ordered 4 episodes. And so they were sort of risk averse, and they were kind of keeping the budget down. Once it became more successful, then they would allow us to bring actors in from New York occasionally.
Yeah, that makes sense. Marc, for our listeners and viewers, tell us sort of how your role intertwined sort of with Jerry and Larry and the writers. I guess what I'm asking is, you said how stressful it was. You get a script and you have to sort of, already have people ready, right? How much input are they giving you, Larry and Jerry, or the writer of the episode, on what they're looking for? It's hard to tell off a page, I'm assuming, who you're going to get, right? Guys like Bookman, I didn't know you didn't know you were going to get, Philip Baker Hall to nail that role, right? How are you quickly assessing, okay, this is what they're looking for. I know these type of people that can do it, and I'm making my calls. But how much input are they giving you? What does it look like to you on the page of a script to know exactly what they're looking for, or do you not know exactly what they're looking for?
Very little.
Yeah,
very little. With the Soup Nazi, I didn't. Like I said, we got these scripts at the last minute. I didn't really know that there was an actual guy it was based on. So I, read the script, and I kind of knew the rhythms of the show and tonally what they were going for. And I guess it was really instinct. And we would bring in a half a dozen actors to audition for a role. And if we were lucky, we nailed it the first time. Sometimes we would have to go back to the drawing board, and really in the room, Jerry and Larry would say, well, that didn't quite work. We're kind of looking for a little more of this, or someone who's a little older, or whatever. So, there was one time that I think Larry Charles literally drew me a picture of what he kind of wanted in the character. And it was actually, I apologize. There was one episode we did not produce called The Gun. I don't know if this has ever come up.
Oh, yeah.
Where Kramer buys a gun from on the illegal market, from a character named Mo Korn. And I believe it was Larry Charles wrote the script, and we ended up not doing the script. They didn't want to do it. I think it was after the table read, they said, no, we're not going to do this. And we had to push. I'm pretty sure Larry actually drew me a picture of what he envisioned Mo Korn to look like. And I was like, I appreciated it. But at the time I was like, I don't build them, I have to really go out and sort of find what I feel is sort of the essence of the character. And coincidentally, in the case of Larry Thomas, he had an uncanny, resemblance to the real guy, but that was not anticipated.
Yeah. You mentioned The Gun. That was season 2, and they talk about a fast script turnaround. They gave you the phone message. Luckily, there wasn't many guest stars in that other than George's girlfriend, what he was yelling at. But we actually ranked it as our top episode, believe it or not.
Really?
But so speaking of and I'm going season through season here. So Tracy Colas, who was Marlene, right? You cast her again later, and that was kind of a theme that happened, right? Suzanne Snyder, Christine Dumford, Mark Christopher Lawrence. Like, tell us a little bit about that, because they each played really different characters. Like, was that I mean, just you needed someone really quick, or did you really take?
Sometimes they just loved the actor, and they sort of knew from a previous episode what they could do, what they could deliver. So many times they would write them into a subsequent script in the same character. Sometimes they would want to bring them back as a different character. But they knew, like, they had a very sort of strong point of view, and that's what they kind of wanted in the scene. So if it meant bringing back an actor to do a different role, that was great. Another actor that was the role of Newman was really only anticipated to be a one episode role. I think I'm pretty sure in the first draft of that first script, he was going to jump off a building, and he was he was going to do it. And then he was so funny, they decided to change it, and they kept bringing him back.
Yeah, it's interesting. They did. At first, it was just the voice of him, of Newman.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, before you even had the actor.
You brought up Philip Baker Hall. If I can tell you a funny story, so that was also kind of a last minute thing, and and I read the script. I had actually seen Philip in a dramatic role. He was in a play downtown LA called The Petrified Forest, and he played the role of for God's sakes, Humphrey Bogart from the movie in that show, in the play. And there was something, and it wasn't a comedy at all, but I felt there was some sort of connective tissue between the character he played in that play and what they were kind of looking for in Bookman. And I had him in, and he just nailed it. And he was not a comedic actor.
Yeah, I mean, he nailed. He's one of everybody we ask. It always comes back to Bookman as one of the best guest stars ever. And that's season 3. Season 3 also we get for the first time Jack Klompus. And I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for those type of people. The Jack Klompuses, both sets of parents. Uncle Leo. All of that world is really really amazing. And these actors, as a different generation. I would think, I don't know if that's like a Larry thing, like, hey, we need this, what's his name? We need these people that I grew up on, or was it just like you cast them the same way you cast everyone else?
It was a little of both. At the beginning of the season, I would actually have a grid of actors that I felt were good for the show. They may or may not be available, but they just felt like very New York, like they would exist in that world. And so I would have lists of men and women that I felt that they would respond to tonally and as far as type-wise. When a episode came up, I would go, God, John O'Hurley would be really good for that role, or that kind of thing. I believe Sandy was recommended for Jack by one of the producers, and I can't remember one. And I can't remember if he auditioned or not. He might not have. Most of the actors who booked the show had auditioned. I mean, literally came in, and some came in, many times before they booked.
How does that? We've heard that from several of the guest stars about coming in many times. Is that? I'm going to assume it's you didn't see something in them for the role, but you liked them, so let's bring them back until you find a match. And sometimes it sounds like it's a loyalty, whether it's with you or with Larry. But the theme that I get is loyalty a lot with the casting. A lot of times it's Larry told me 5 years ago he's going to do something for me, or someone had known you. Is that a lot of your position is building relationships and that sort of trust and loyalty with some of these actors?
Well, you have to remember, I was casting a lot of different shows at the time. And I can't remember. I mean, I was doing the Larry Sanders Show. I was doing Third Rock from the Sun.
Parker Lewis, Party of
Yeah,
Five.
all at the same time. The Nanny. So there were a lot of actors that were flowing through our office. And if someone wasn't right for The Nanny or Larry Sanders, I was like, oh, they might be right for Seinfeld, or vice versa. So there was just a huge volume of actors kind of coming through our office, so, as sort of a resource. So the other thing is, when we had them come in to read for Larry and Jerry, it was usually Larry, Jerry, and George Shapiro was almost always there as well. And you knew when they came in the room and read, even if they didn't book the role, that they loved them, because they laughed. And when Larry and Jerry were laughing, you made a mental note. Okay, they didn't book this one, but let's remember them for the next one. But even when I would pitch them for another role, they go, okay, well, let's have them in again. They wanted to hear the words,
Right.
So I would have to convince some of the actors to come in multiple times, especially a lot of the girlfriends, because we churned through so many women on that show.
Yeah, I was gonna
Convincing
ask you.
Deborah Messing to come in for the third time or whatever to read, it was hard.
I was going to ask you about the girlfriends, how involved you were there versus like the Jack Klompuses or Patrick Cronin's, like a Sid Farkas. Like, I don't want to say they were just pretty faces, but they were, right? I mean, they were beautiful women, models probably, but I'm just curious how involved you were in that versus like you nailed Sid Farkas. Richard Fancy Littman were like, and again, these were multiple scenes, but I'm just curious your involvement versus like the girlfriends. Was Meg Lieberman more involved with that versus, or was that kind of?
No. I mean, Meg and I, Meg was doing her own shows. I was the point person on Seinfeld with Ryan. So Meg would always collaborate if we were sort of stuck. She'd say, hey, I just saw an actor who read for me on The Days and Nights of Molly Dodd or whatever it was. You should really think about her for Seinfeld. And then I'd meet her. But no, it was really just a lot of volume. And, I would keep track with the agents, because we were going through a lot of actresses and a lot of, very attractive comedic actresses, which is sort of a finite talent pool. So every pilot season, when actors would come out from New York or Chicago or whatever, I would keep track with the agents, say, who do you have in town now that I haven't seen for Seinfeld? So I think that's how Lisa Edelstein booked the job, and a lot of those women, they had literally just gotten Lauren Graham. I think he had just gotten off the plane, and we had her in to read, and she booked that. She actually might have done a Third Rock from the Sun first, but then I knew her from that, and then I put her in the Seinfeld.
Yeah, you mentioned Lauren Graham. That's she went out to bigger and better things. I'm just curious. A lot of them, like Bryan Cranston, went out to bigger and better things.
Bryan was like a journeyman actor. He wasn't a very well. As before he did Malcolm in the Middle. He was an actor for hire. He would come in and read. It's funny because Seinfeld's on all the time, and I just happened to catch it at 11 o'clock the other night, and I can't remember the name of the episode, but I was looking at it, and one of the med students in it, I'm like, oh my God, that's Daniel Day Kim, who had like one role as like a med student. I think it was the episode with Mickey, when they're
the burning.
Exactly. Exactly. And I was like, I had totally forgotten that he was in it and did one line. Same thing. Well, French Stewart was in one. He had like one line. Is like, wasn't he a movie ticket taker? I think. Yeah. I saw him in a play. He did the one line on there, and then we were casting Third Rock from the Sun. I said to the producers, I want you to see this guy. He's not at all what you're looking for, but he's really funny. And he came in and read for that and got, a series regular role.
Yeah. Also in The Burning is Brian Posehn, and Patton
Right.
Oswalt was in an episode, and
Patton.
Dom Herrera. A lot of these stand-up comics. I don't know if that has like Jerry just kind of pulling them in, or if that's still they're auditioning from their agents, kind of getting them involved. But
They
I
were
did notice
auditioning. I mean,
Yeah.
I was very much in the alternative comedy scene, and I went to comedy clubs every night, and so that's how I'd see Patton and Sarah Silverman, and Sarah Silverman was on the Larry Sanders Show, so there was some connectivity there, and obviously Jerry knew some of them from the clubs, but 9 times out of 10 they came in and auditioned. I can't tell you how many times Jack Black came in and auditioned,
Oh, interesting.
and he never booked a role.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned that. You mentioned like Richard Schiff, Jack Black. I'm just curious. Was there someone you had like the role was pegged, and then it could have been one of those guys, and then someone came out of the blue that really shocked you? Do you remember any of those?
Well, it was just all about the reading. I mean, I don't think that I even brought Jack Black to producers. He came in pre-read for me, and he's just so funny, but I was just like, it just didn't work.
Interesting.
Mark, you touched on this on the audition. I'm just curious. Obviously one of our favorite season 4, where they recreate the pilot. How true was that? Jerry and George sitting there during casting. Was that how it was? Kind of with Larry, Jerry, and you?
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because they were, the writers were together for weeks before we actually started the season, and before I saw them. And it was the first time I would come in, the first part of the season, the first day of the first season of casting, I would walk into the office, and Larry and Jerry, they had desks. They were like butted up against each other in the same office. They both had their feet up on the desk, and I'd walk in the office and go, "All right, it's real. Here's Hirschfeld." It meant, the casting was going to start, and the season was about to begin. So it was really like that.
I would imagine, Mark, that as the show became more popular, the later seasons, I'm guessing it was a little bit easier to cast. But I'm also curious, when they have episodes with already famous people like a John Voight or Marissa Tomei, Bette Midler, these types. I'm assuming they wrote this and then we had to just guarantee we can get them, or was it like, hey, how does that stuff work sometimes? I'm curious.
A lot of times, for example, the John Voight one, we didn't know he was going to do it. I mean, they had written this episode about John Voight's car, and we had no idea. It was ridiculous. We had no idea if he would agree to do it or not. You're absolutely right. Later in the season, when the show became more popular, it was a lot easier to get those guest stars like Bette Midler or whatever. But a lot of times it was written specifically for someone, and we would reach out to try to get them. And like in the case of Marissa Tomei, we were lucky that she was game and wanted to do it and was available for the week. Otherwise they might have to rewrite it and place in another actor. I mean, we did that on the Larry Sanders Show all the time. They would write an episode specifically for an actor they wanted to be on the talk show, but if they weren't available or didn't want to do it, then they had to rewrite the whole thing for another actor. It's the same thing on Seinfeld.
Mark, who was the laundry list here, right? Putty, Jimmy, you name it. But like, if you had one, like what was the one you think you just nailed and like it brought the show to a new level?
Well, I love Putty because he was just such a great counterpoint for Julia, and someone just fantastic for her to play off of, because he was sort of this big dumb galoot, and it was just a great fit. I'm trying to think of another one that there are just so many.
I like the guy. That kissed Julia underneath the stands during the Puerto Rican Day.
Oh yeah, he was brilliant, wasn't he?
Yeah. Really good looking, sharp.
Yeah. God, how did they get him? That's so funny because I would read with all the actors, in the room for Jerry and Larry.
Yeah.
And they always laughed at my reading of Jason or Jerry or whatever. And even if the actor wasn't getting the laughs, I was getting the laughs, which was very nice. So later in the season, like, Hirschfeld, we really want you to do a role. I was like, oh, I don't know. And, so the last season, they said, we want you to do this role. And I can't remember what the episode was, but I wasn't available because I was going to the Aspen Comedy Festival. I was on the board and I couldn't get out of it. And so I had to beg out. And then another, the next one, the episode after that came up, the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And my wife was like, you had better do that part. So I ended up doing it. And actually, the kiss under the stands was completely, not improvised at the last minute, but the writers came up with it at the last minute. I think the director said, wouldn't it be funny if they had this tussle and then sort of making out? So they just sort of put it in at the last minute.
Incredible.
That was fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people that just pop off the screen, even if you feel like they were in more episodes. I mean, guys like Jean Paul, and Sid, the guy that the cars in the alternate side. I really love Warren Frost and the Rosses.
Yeah, they were great. They were great. Grace Zabriskie.
Yes,
they were fantastic. Just so funny. It's a funny one. Lawrence Tierney.
Yes.
Julia's dad.
Yep, the Jacket, one of our favorites.
He was tough. I mean, he is a tough cookie. And I'm pretty sure, he did not audition. I had suggested him because of just the weight and intensity that he has as an actor. So I would come in and I'd do a little film festival for Jerry and Larry. I'd throw in videotapes saying, this is who I think is right for the role. And they'd say, great, he won't read though, let's do it. And it was a difficult week on set with him because he does not suffer fools. And it was just, he's that guy. And, but the results was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect casting. It's perfect casting. You feel them scared of him just sitting there. He doesn't even have to do anything.
Exactly.
Sitting there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think season 3, it just, you mentioned it, Klompus, Bookman, and obviously the year before with Tierney, just set the tone. I was going to say, you mentioned this earlier, but what kind of direction did Larry and Jerry give you, like, pre-season, if you will, right? I mean, think about season 3, like Babu, like he would have an extended stay, or Mr. Lippman. Like, did you know these guys were going to be recurring characters? No. You went in like it's a one-time thing. It
was a one-time thing. If they loved them, they would write for them. They, and by the way, there was no sort of sitting down with Larry and Jerry at the beginning and saying, this is sort of our strategy for the season, or these are the more important characters. Literally, I would get the script and that fire alarm bell would go off, and then we just started casting. It was very rare they would say, this is the kind of actor we want in advance. They wanted sort of us to present some options to them, and then them to be sort of inspired by them. And then if they love someone, they would not only bring them back, they would write toward them, whether it's Babu or, I mean, I think that, perfect example is Heidi Swedberg, who played Susan, was, a network executive in the pilot episode, right?
Yeah.
No one anticipated that she would continue to recur on the show and get engaged to
yeah, that was one of our questions. I'm curious. I know there's a lot of post the show, there's a lot of controversy on that, like they didn't like her, like, so they kind of killed her off. Any regrets on her as Susan, or is that just something just didn't work?
I mean, I don't think that Jason connected with her in a comedic level. But for me personally, I like the fact that there was an antagonistic relationship. I didn't want him to be in a happy relationship.
Right.
I mean, did anyone really want to see that? An actor who is a good fit? And so maybe ultimately they decided, we've kind of played out that story, and so let's figure out how to end it with the envelopes, but which was a great kind of fun surprise.
Yeah.
But to me, I don't have any regrets because I thought she was a good fit with him.
Did you, I mean, I know that became public, but did you get that during the seasons? I mean, these are 4 big stars. Did Kramer ever come up to you? I'm making this up. Did Kramer ever come up to you and say, like, we get someone else for Mickey? Not that Mickey was perfect, but like, were there any, did they have any say in who they wanted to partner with at any level?
Honestly, no. I mean, I'm trying to think if there was any. I mean, by the way, Jason never came up to me and said, you know what, Heidi and I are connecting. I mean, he might have had though a kind of a sidebar conversation with Jerry and Larry later on in the season, or I don't see where this character's, where this relationship is going, or I don't want it to be a successful relationship.
Right.
But never to me. I can't imagine. I don't remember one time that Julia came up to me and said, you know what, the guy you cast as my boyfriend, Jake Jarmel, is a lot. You know what I mean?
Right.
She never did that.
Right. What I love about hearing these stories from yourself and other guests we've had on is just the like I said, it always goes back to this sort of loyalty and when we had Catherine Cates on, for example, she was the babka lady, right?
Right.
And then years later, you bring her back to be the counter person in the same bakery to do the rye. Like that could have been anybody. You could have just pulled someone up and said, hand a rye to this old lady or whatever, right? But it was like she was the person behind the counter. Let's bring her back, right?
Yeah.
And it just it's a small detail, but it's also more of I just feel like it's more of it shows kind of the loyalty to the people that are with you guys and that you like you said, if you like someone, I don't know if there's really a question.
Sometimes we would get a script and we'd be in a bakery or something, and we would say to the producers, "You want to bring back Catherine Cates?"
Right.
And they would say, "Oh yeah." Or other times, they would come to me and say, "Hey, we wrote this thing. We're gonna bring back this actor to do the part."
Right. You know what I always found fascinating too, and I don't know, is the Larry David cameos when Larry David decides to be the newsstand guy or be on the boat in the ocean for Greenpeace. Yeah. Whenever so, I'm curious. Like, does that come about out of necessity? Like, oh no, we need someone. He's like, I'll do it. Or does he say, I really want to just be this person on that raft with Larry Charles in the water? Like, I'm always curious, like where he made those decisions.
I think that a lot of times, a lot of the writers ended up doing little Alfred Hitchcock cameos in some way or another, in a scene or in a restaurant or a bar or whatever. They throw them a line. Sometimes it was something that was planned in advance. George Steinbrenner, I believe we started auditioning actors, voiceover actors, to do the voice of George Steinbrenner. Mm-hmm. And then we sent some to Larry and said, I'll just do it myself. So, sometimes I think they enjoyed it, I'll be the guy in the cape.
We talked about the pilot in season 4. I was always curious. It's mentioned that, the butler he's John Ritter's cousin. Was that true?
Wait, who? You're gonna have to refresh my memory. Who's the butler?
I don't know who the butler was.
I know. You mean when they did the
show within the show, yeah.
Right. In the show, Jerry references, it's John Ritter's cousin. Like, for some reason, I never knew if that was true or not. No. Okay. But what I'm curious about is the casting for that was incredible. I know you had like Mariska Hargitay come in to do Elaine, and obviously Jeremy Piven.
Right.
Like, that must have been a lot of fun, right? Just to like cast for the cast. And I'm assuming some of those guys tried out for the original roles.
Well, it's funny because Jeremy Piven was a series regular in the Larry Sanders Show at the time.
Right.
And so I went up to him and said, "Hey, would you be interested in playing George in the pilot?" And he ended up having a week off from Larry Sanders, so he was able to do it. But yeah, it was great fun. You know what was also great fun was when we cast, what was it called now? The anti Jerry and Kramer and
Bizarro Jerry.
the Bizarro episode. That's one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah.
We had Larry Hankin as Kramer, and that was.
Well, he was in the pilot, but yeah.
All right,
was,
right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, not in that, but it was a great. That was a great. It was one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. You know, in your career, we've gone over is legendary. So many different shows, and you kind of touched on this already. But you know, what do you think made? I mean, Larry Sanders. I mean, Gary Shandling's a genius, and you worked on so many shows. But what made Seinfeld, you know, different as far as from your position goes compared to the hundreds of other shows you've worked on? You know, what was the kind of the difference there?
Honestly, I think it was a happy accident. You know, it was under the radar. It came out of the late night department. We did this little pilot and we'll do 4 episodes. No one was really paying attention to it. And when I was working on the show, it made me laugh like crazy. I was like, okay, great. Me and, you know, how many other New York Jews are going to enjoy the show? You know, we really felt it was going to be creatively successful, but really have not a broad appeal. I don't think anyone expected it to, I know no one expected it to blow up the way it did. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, like, and then the shift from Wednesday to Thursday, right? I mean,
that was it. Putting it on.
Like, listen, the Visa, right? Cheryl, great casting by her, and Ping, love those guys. Like, actually, actually, let me ask you about those 2, Cheryl and Ping. Like, and again, that show only did 11 million in total viewers, and then you see something like The Frogger years later doing 30 million. It's just it's unbelievable. But it was
it took time for people to discover the show.
Yeah,
it took time for the show to sort of figure out what the show was, and have. I mean, how many scenes were in each episode? Later on, it was at the beginning. It was more of a traditional sitcom with your living room and maybe a few sets. We had so many remote sets, so many exteriors, so many, different characters coming and going, so many plot lines intertwining at the end. That's what made the show ultimately successful. And then they would find a way for all the sort of rando plots to sort of come together and clash at the end, which is really what Larry has done in the maturation process of his show on HBO.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Mark, this has been. I mean, I'm loving these stories. What is there one story you maybe can remember that sort of kind of you kind of think about when you think about your time at Seinfeld, as far as maybe you were surprised by the role, the person did more with it than you thought, or you wanted someone and they got away, or just some memory that you kind of have taken from the show that you haven't shared with us yet, that you kind of just
Well, I think during the casting the pilot, so the pilot, there was no Elaine in it.
Right.
We had Lee Garlington, who played the waitress, who is really going to be sort of the female point of view in the show, just as she's coming up and pouring the coffee. And that didn't really work. And NBC's wisdom, when they picked up the show, they said, we really need a woman in the cast. So they kind of went back and figured out the character of Elaine. And we saw during that casting process, every actress, every funny character actress in Hollywood. And it was like a laundry list. Everyone was considered and seen, and we couldn't find it. At the same time, Julia was on a series called Day by Day. I can't remember what network it was for, but I had been in touch with her manager, and the show was not doing great. And I was in touch with her manager. I said, I really want her to come in for Elaine. She said, we can't. She's in, this show is alive. If she were to come in I said, just for a meeting. She said, even for a meeting, if she came in, it would, show that she was not loyal to her current series. The day, I can't remember, it was in June or something. I think we're casting during the summer, the pilot. And the day her show was canceled, I picked up the phone and said to managers, please, she's got to come in tomorrow for a meeting. Just have her come in for a meeting. So I had her come in. We were at Renmar Studios at the time, this crappy little studio on like Cahuenga or something. And she came in just for a meeting with Larry and Jerry, and just the chemistry was so fantastic. She didn't have to read anything. She came out of the room, and Larry said, she's the one. So, that was very exciting. And the other thing, which is sort of a great story, is, so when we were casting the pilot, we sort of narrowed down George and Kramer to two actors for each role. It was Jason Alexander, who he flew in from New York, who was really Larry's favorite, and it was Larry Miller, who is a wonderful comedian and a very good friend of Jerry's. And Jerry was leaning toward Larry. Well, first of all, he was great. It was very sort of dry quality to the read. But what Jerry liked about it is he already had a shorthand with Larry Miller. So the relationship was already there. He didn't have to work hard at creating the relationship with Jason.
Right.
And so when we had them both into test, because Jason was such a great actor and such a generous actor, and Jerry knew that he was really sort of an actor in training, it became very clear that to surround Jerry with great actors that would help lift him up was only going to help the show. And that's how Jason got the part.
Incredible. The rest is
and
history.
then you said Kramer was down too.
Yeah. So this is interesting, because when you test at the network, you don't know what's going to happen. You're bringing your favorites, but the dark horse can win. And at the time, I think NBC had a press tour at like the Century Plaza Hotel, and the only way we could test was to bring our actors to the Century Plaza to a conference room, and then Warren Littlefield, in between press sessions, would come down and watch the auditions. So we had two actors, Michael Richards and another wonderful actor named Steve Vinovich, audition. And Steve was really the actor as written. In the pilot, Kramer was this, agoraphobic kind of shut-in who shuffled in and out of Jerry's apartment in his bathrobe. And Steve played that to a T. Michael Richards literally exploded into the room during the audition. And Warren Littlefield said, we can't not go with Michael Richards. How can you pass that up? You need to reimagine the character and sort of embrace what Michael brings you. And they did.
Wow.
The best writers and the best showrunners, they look at the actor and what they bring to the role, and then that inspires them to write toward them. And that's what Jerry and Larry did in every occasion, whether it's Julia, Michael, Jason, Newman, all the other wonderful players that we had in the show.
That's a great story. I mean, marrying great writing,
incredible.
great acting, it's unbelievable. But it's funny, Littlefield, president of NBC, And you mentioned Seinfeld was just a little pilot, right? I mean, they must do 50 pilots a year or something like that back then, you know? So it's interesting. Littlefield's kind of at every one, and he made a stake that Richards should get Kramer.
Yeah.
So he obviously saw something in the show, which is special.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, he wouldn't let Rick Ludwin, who's had a late night, use his late night budget to make a little show, if he wasn't kind of invested in it. But the stakes were low. It's not like you had a big star at the center of the show. I mean, Jerry was a well-known comedian, but he wasn't like, you know, a huge. He didn't fill a stadium.
Right, not at that time.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And now he does, and you know, quite frankly, a lot of credit should be given to the show to Larry and Jerry. But Mark, I got to tell you that the people you place in the show are remarkable. We mentioned it, from like Sid Farkas to David Puddy to Jean-Paul. I mean, we can go on and on. I mean, it's an honor to talk to you, and we thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure. It was really nice talking to you. I appreciate your keeping the show alive. You know, it's so much fun to know that the show, you know, has transcended generations, and people still love it. Well, we're doing, you know, there's going to be a Married with Children special on Fox, and they're doing a documentary about it.
Oh, wow.
Making Married with Children, and I was just interviewed for it a few months ago. So they're, you know, in the middle of putting that together. So that's another show that I worked on, which is so nice to see that has sort of transcended.
Yeah,
time.
I mean that show is revolutionary as well, and we're going to look at for that special you're talking about as well. That's awesome.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much.
Yeah. I mean, every single guest star we've talked to, Mark, has mentioned, you know, how great you are, and just, you know, we had to talk to you, so we really appreciate your time.
All right, guys. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves. All right, bye. It's hard to keep track of everybody.
I mean, yeah, your Rolodex is probably overflowing.
In fact, at the beginning of the podcast, I actually seriously want to do a disclaimer to apologize to all the actors whose names I will have forgotten over the past 30 years. It's just too much, you know, and their origin stories. But I will do the best I can. You guys know so much about the show that you're going to stump me. And so if there's any way that you can say, oh, what about so-and-so who played the role of such and such in this episode, that would really help jog memory.